Hi everyone, so we're going to start. I have to apologise, there's some background noise, it's my daughter on the phone. So welcome to today's session on EHCP assessments. The session is being recorded for Family Voice and will only be used for Family Voice in accordance to GDPR and everything else. So welcome on board everyone. Do people want to go and do a round of introductions, or is everybody aware of everybody else? Because I think we've got Bev, got Jason Merrill, got Laura Smith join us now, and Michaela Milliner and Roger Valentine. So would everybody, are people okay with everyone, or would you like to introduce yourself? I'm happy with everything, really. Should we do a round of intro? So I'm Naz, one of the parent reps of Family Voice. I just help facilitate these sessions. So I do the intro and then I sit back and let whoever is doing the speech deliver their speech, and then it's questions and answers at the end. Jason, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Jason Merrill. I'm a parent rep for
Katie?
Hi everyone, my name is Katie Blessett. I'm the head of the Statutory Assessment and Monitoring Service. We look after education, health and care plans in terms of the monitoring of them, review and the assessment of EHC needs assessments.
Bev?
Oh yeah, I've got a daughter, well, young adult now, who has an EHC plan, but she's not had a review for like nearly 2 years on it.
Michaela? Michaela, would you like to introduce yourself? I think Michaela's got us on mute. Laura, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello.
Hi, Laura.
Hiya. Yeah, I'm a parent care. Oh God, it's gone off.
We've lost Laura. Michelle, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, that's fine. I'm one of the Statutory Assessment and Monitoring Officers, and I'll be partly delivering the training today.
Oh, fantastic. So I should hand it over to you guys then.
Okay, well, thank you very much for inviting us along today. So what we're doing, first of all, is we've introduced ourselves, which is lovely. So I just wanted to just get onto the next slide. A little bit about some housekeeping. So first of all, we want to make sure everybody's very comfortable. If you don't mind turning your phones on to silent, that would be great, please. Obviously, take any breaks as needed, any comfort breaks that you need. It's a funny time of year. I think myself, I just had a look through my emails and I think it said, we're going to attempt a delivery today between 11 and 1. And I thought, oh no. So apologies, and I hope we can all kind of accept that there may be children and there may be animals and there may be doorbells, and we can understand that with each other. So I hope everyone's comfortable with that today. There will be the opportunity to ask questions at the end of the presentation. Please feel free to ask anything throughout. Bev, I'd really like to pick up with you at the end, if that's okay. We can maybe spend 5 minutes chatting if you're happy with that on your particular case. That would be great. But please, you know, just as far as I'm concerned, it's a fairly informal session. So there is quite a few slides, and we'll talk through them. But you know, I want it to be a bit more interactive and not just a lot of sort of chalk and talk, so to speak. So I hope that's helpful for you. So the purpose of today's session is just what's covered there around what's an EHC. I know that some of you already have children or young people that have EHCs, some of you may not, so it's really an understanding of who can apply for a needs assessment, what the process is for that, and what happens if your child does or does not end up with a plan. Some key terms really, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with already, but we never like to assume everybody knows everything in the terminology that's used. So there's just a few acronyms which we know we don't like, but unfortunately they're always about, aren't they? So hopefully the ones that are on there you may have come across before, but if not, that's just an explanation of what they mean. I hope I'm not going too quickly. If you feel you want me to repeat anything, or you just want to check anything over, please just say. It's hard to know how fast to go, I think, isn't it? Okay, so just a little bit around SENI services. So you'll see there that the head of SEN Inclusion Services is Sheila Sullivan, and there's a different teams that sit under Sheila. So you'll see on the right hand side, that's my service, and within my service we have got it's sort of little mini teams. So we've got the area Senko, who's Jess Conway. You probably met Jess before on various things, and Jess leads the sort of the communications from SENI services. She leads on the training, organisation of the training, and she also line manages the transition officers, and their posts are really around focusing on key transitions such as year 2 leavers, and also secondary transfer, and transfer when young people are due to leave compulsory education. So that's their focus within the mainstream schools. Then we have the main bit down the middle, which is the SAMS officers. So you'll see that there's a number of SAMS officers there. However, they all have sort of different roles within the service. So we have 2 officers that deal with just assessment work, and that is once an assessment is agreed. So it's really from week 7 to 16, and then up to week 20 if a plan is agreed. And then we have 1 officer that deals with the 0 to 6 weeks, and that was really based on a kind of you said we did approach, where we had feedback around communication needing to be improved. So we decided to implement this role because then it was 1 point of contact for all families that were going through the first 6 weeks of the assessment process. It enabled the officer to spend more time in terms of talking through the process, and going back and checking with families if there's anything else that they had to add, chasing up information that may not have been submitted, to kind of try and reduce the number of mediations, because sometimes we were finding that we ended up not agreeing to an assessment, and then we'd end up in a mediation situation, and we'd suddenly get some information from the school, for example, around support, with plan. Had that at the decision stage initially, we probably would have made a different decision. So we thought as well that this 0 to 6 week post supports that, because it will say, she will look at the information and say, actually we're missing a timetable. So it's time for the officer to go back to the schools and make sure we've got everything. So when it goes to the decision making arena, we've got absolutely everything that we're hoping that so we're making the right decision at the right time, in essence. Then we also have 3 review officers, so they deal with the reviews, and they split up. So, and we've got various, some take special schools, and then there's a sort of an alphabetical split. And there's the colleges and the early years as well. So they still hold relatively large caseloads when you sort of look at the comparison across the Eastern region. Within that, we also have the 2 ladies at the bottom of that list who work within our disagreement resolution, complex cases. and their posts are really around sort of working with families, maybe where there's a PA and the mediation and disagreement resolution work, and they also have responsibility for children who are educated outside of Peterborough or in independent settings. You'll see on the right across the right hand side, these are our support members of staff, and without them we would fall apart, because they're sort of the first line of contact when you ring into us, or they man the inbox, the generic inbox. They do all of the processes in terms of the workflows around this sort of work, and they really do keep us going. So they're absolute gold dust for us. And then the post at the top here, he's just joined us recently, and he's supporting with our sort of improving our data work, data information, and etc. So I hope that's an okay overview of our service. Also within the SENI services, we've got the educational psychology service. Currently, Portage is also managed by the principal educational psychologist. And then over in this arm, we've got the specialist teacher. Someone's that's got that better. Thank you. Yeah, that's headed up by Jill Croutage, and you can see we've got the manager of the sensory physical support service there, and the manager of the autism ADHD service there. So that covers the various teachers of visual impairment, hearing impairment, physical disability, etc. And then sort of sitting alongside us here, but it's a kind of a dotted line really, is the SEN partnership service. So whilst they're an integral part in terms of our world, they sit slightly separately to us.
Oh yeah. Wow.
So as I mentioned at the start of our session, our service really is responsible for education, health and care plans. We do have a duty to make sure that they're reviewed on an annual basis. We are involved with the child or young person for the duration of the plan. Planning adjustment process. We work with schools and the review process. We don't go to annual reviews unless it's a transition year or there's a particular reason for us to be there. As you know, probably know, we've got in excess of 1,100 children and plans, and you can see the staff in there. It would be impossible to go to the meetings and do all of the casework and the updating of plans, etc. With that number of people. So it's not possible for us to do that. I think that's probably about it, other than to just say really that each school has a link officer. So they have a monitoring officer and a link transition officer. So the monitoring officer will do the non-sort of transition years, and your transition officer will work with years 5 and 6 and 9, 10, 11 in mainstream. So who can contact us? Well, basically anyone, all parent carers, all practitioners, young people over 60. And just for future reference, that's our contact details there in terms of the main phone line, which is tricky at the moment because we're all working remotely. So it's very hard because the assistants that are taking the main phone calls, they can't transfer. Whereas normally, you know, you'd have people sitting at desks and you'd say, can I speak to so-and-so? And then they transfer to the phone, and we can't do that. So it's very reliant on them then sending an email to somebody who's working at home elsewhere saying, please, can you ring? So obviously the amount of email traffic has increased. We've changed the way in which we're communicating with parents now, in that the first go-to, as long as parents consent to it, is sending everything through email. And that's really something that we wanted to move to, but the pandemic pushed us into that a lot quicker than we maybe ordinarily would have done. We used to send so many things by post, The council policy is that everything goes second class, so it took a lot longer. And when you are asking parents to get back to you in 15 days of receipt of a draft plan, that's a lot of pressure. You may not have got the plan for 4, 5, 6 days, so you've already eaten into that date, and then so therefore, you know, they'll ring up and say, well, we've only just got this and it's saying it's got to be back in 6 days time. So obviously we'll work with families and say, well, yeah, of course, take the time you need, but that then impacts on our ability to finalise plans on time, with maybe having to get consultations, etc. out. So we're finding that if parents are in agreement, we will send them sort of a test email and ask them, and then we'll always reply to their email rather than but sorry, I've got someone's sound on. That's better, thank you. Rather than just type in an email, just to make sure that we've got the right address. So that seems to be working well. The feedback that we're getting from parent carers is very positive in terms of sharing through email, because they're getting it there and then, really, so they tend to be happier with it. We understand that there are some people that still have trouble accessing in that way, and of course we will always ensure in those cases that we can send through the post. Okay, so we're just going to do a little starter now, just to have a couple of minutes thought for you. So just going to ask a bit of a question, and that is, what percentage of all pupils in England do you think have an education, health and care plan? I don't know if you want to start putting A, B or C in the chat. That might be the easiest way. I can't see the chat, so Michelle, I'll be reliant on you, please, to keep an eye on the answers coming through.
So far, we've got one saying B, so 3.3. So we've got a couple of Bs, one C so far.
Okay.
Yeah, looks like we've got about 3 people saying B and 1 person saying C.
Okay, so those that said B, you're on the money, really. So that was the case in 2020. It's gone up slightly again since then, but you can see the rise. So in 2019 we were on 3.1, 2020 3.3, and we're now 3.7. So you can see that it's going up. So before we get to the education, health and care plan stage, you might be aware that there's sort of a level before that, which is known as SEN support. And that is the level in which schools can meet the special educational needs of a child or young person from within the school's own resources, their own notional SEN budget. So do you think there's quite a lot of those, or do you think there's a fewer amount of those? The next question really is, what percentage of all pupils have SEN support? A, B or C?
So far, we've got 1 C and 1 B.
Okay. Any more coming through?
We've got an A as well, so we've got a cross section there, a couple of Bs, A and a C.
Lovely, thank you. So this is about where we are, 12.2% SEN support and 3.7 at education, health and care plans. So this is taken from, you'll see it says K code or E code, and they're just sort of codes used by educational settings in the census as to which children are on SEN support, i.e. the K code, and which have education, health and care plans. So you'll see there, as I talked a little bit earlier, is that the SEN support is help that's additional to or different from support generally given to other children the same age. So if the support is over and above what the school can offer without additional resource, that's looking at an EHC needs assessment. Excuse me. Any questions so far? Nothing in the chat. Okay, lovely. So, a young person has special educational needs if they have a learning difficulty or disability which calls for special educational provision to be made for them. And a child of compulsory school age or young person has a learning difficulty or disability if he or she has a significantly greater difficulty in learning than the majority of others the same age, or a disability which prevents or hinders them from making use of the educational facilities generally provided for others of the same age in the mainstream settings. Okay. So what is special educational provision? Well, it is something that's different to or additional to that which we've all given to other children or young people of the same age, which we've covered. Okay, and then we've just got learning difficulty and the disability, so it's a little bit of just confirmation of what we've just covered. So what is an EHC? So I know that some of you already have children and young people with EHC plans, but for those of you that don't or are new to it, it's a legal document that describes the needs of the child. It's also comes from a position of strength as well. So it gives us some background on the child, it gives their strengths, it gives their special educational needs and the impact of those needs on their education. And then it will describe the provision that's required to be put in place to meet those needs, to enable the child or young person to meet their outcomes and their aspirations for future. So the SEND reforms kind of really brought in the education, health and care plans, which was a change from statements of special educational need, which some of you may have had experience with. So apologies if you already know this. So the Children and Families Act 2014, the focuses on that were high aspirations, person-centred approach, joint commissioning, and to put the voice of the children, young people and their families at the centre of the processes. The other relevant legislation includes the SEND regs, the Equality Act and the Code of Practice. So there's lots more to those, which I'm sure some of you are aware of, but I won't go into too much detail. I mean, the change in emphasis really is that every school is a SEND school. It's all around the inclusion, there's the right to mainstream, and actually our strapline across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough for our SEND strategy is that SEND is everybody's business. It's not for just the SENCO, for the children to be off in a discrete area. It's around proper inclusion at every level across the school. So also the changing culture was working with, not doing too. So I've just touched on the young person being decision makers, young person and child focused. It's outcomes focused, it's co-produced, and that kind of helps in terms of the planning meeting. So we're holding those virtually at the moment. That seems to be working well. A lot of people quite like the fact that they're being held virtually, but pre-pandemic we were holding them face to face. But it really is getting the people in the room and looking at the child's strengths, needs, aspirations, and the outcomes as a result of that are needed in the provision to meet those outcomes. So it really is working together to make sure the plan is properly person-centred. So we're just going to take 5 minutes now if you want to grab a quick drink, and I'm going to leave some common myths on the screen. So just take a couple of minutes really to have a look at those, and then within the 5 minutes, once you've had a little drink and a little chance to have a look at those, Michelle's going to take over and she will answer the common myths as to whether or not they're true or false. Any questions before we do that? No? Okay, so we'll just a couple of minutes, have a look through those, and Michelle will come on to you about maybe another 2 minutes or so.
Yeah, it's having a break. It's not very useful actually. No, I thought it was. Okay, thank you.
Is it very useful?
No. No, I wanted the. I've got the 13, but there's careful that guy. I wanted the one that's just come out, but there's like £60 a month. I'm not paying £60 a month. I'm paying 50 for this one, and that one's like 45. So I wanted this one's 50, 51, I think, and that's 45. So it's cheaper. I couldn't get it any cheaper. I tried. I'll stay on for a little bit of time. I'm not going to stay on. Go to Marks and Spencer's and ask them if they'll do it, but by the looks of it, they're not only doing it at the weekend, but they might do it. Might make an exception. You never know, do you?
That's right. Done it now, because when I get back from the get back, I'm like, I can't bother.
Yeah.
Because I know what I get like if I'm not going to town. Huh?
It's dark outside. I couldn't bother going yesterday. It's dark. Not because it's not because it's going to go for this, but because it was dark and I was like, oh.
Okay, I think we've had about 5 minutes. Can we just make sure that everybody's mics are on mute for me, please? And then we'll go through each one. Okay, so hopefully you've had a chance to look at these. These are quite common myths. We do find people talking to the statutory assessment and monitoring team about each one of these. So the first one there, the early help assessment. I'm just going to ask if people can put their mics on mute again. Double check.
Could you just do it for me, please?
I used to do it for workshop.
I think we do have somebody with
two things.
on. So if you can just double check for me. Okay, thank you. So this first one here, it is quite common. People talk to us about, an early help assessment, which is obviously abbreviated to EHA. Some people think it's actually needed before an education, health and care plan needs assessment is requested and submitted. That is actually totally false. I believe we do have still somebody with their mic on.
Natasha,
Oh, sorry.
can you put yourself on mute, please? Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you so much. This is false, this first one. We may find that some of our needs assessments do have an early help assessment, for some of them, but it's not actually needed before an education, health and care needs assessment is requested. So that is false. The second one, we get this a lot as well. Some people feel that a diagnosis is needed for an education, health and care plan to be issued. That is false as well. Yes, we do have some with young people that do have a diagnosis, but it is certainly not needed for an education, health and care plan to be issued. What's important is that we understand the child's needs. So if I just move on to number 3, you need an education, health and care plan, obviously they're sometimes abbreviated to EHCP, to get support in school. Well, hopefully from listening to what Katie was saying earlier about, you know, the percentage of what we would class as SEN support, that is currently at 12.2. It was 12.1, as you can see from the slide, you know, slightly rising. So that 12.2% of children receiving SEN support do not have an education, health and care plan, but they get the support in school. So currently, all three, the first 1, 2 and 3 are false. So we'll move on to number 4. The education, health and care plan process is quicker if parents apply. This is false as well. And in a second, we're going to move on to that whole process so you get to see how long it takes. So it is actually a long process. It's not a quick process, but you will see something is happening at every single stage. And it is a statutory process. So regardless of what local authority you live in, it is a statutory 20-week process. And we'll go on to that soon. So that is false as well. Number 5, a child or young person with an EHCP would definitely get a place in a special school. I can confirm that is false as well. So all of these are false. And you'll see a bit later on when we talk about the process, and if a parent does request a special school, exactly what happens, because that would need to be considered by the local authority. It doesn't mean to say that a child would automatically get a place just because they have an education, health and care plan. Okay, I'm just going to see if I can move on to the next slide. I think I've taken control, but let's just double check. There we go. 2 seconds. I'm just going to see if I've got control. There we go. So hopefully now you can see the slide that says, does my child need an education, health and care plan? So if you look at this slide, it says if the child or young person is not making sufficient progress. Now, what we mean by that is if the school has put in all the support under SEN support, done all the assessments, put in place the appropriate provision at that time, but the child is still making insufficient progress, then it would be then worth talking to the school about, and considering yourself, whether the local authority should consider that further provision be made appropriate through an EHC needs assessment to be carried out to analyse those needs and provision needed to see if it could be met still under SEN support, or whether we would then be considering an education, health and care plan. Just going to try and move on to the next slide. Two seconds again, it's not moving on for myself. There we are. I'm sorry about the delay, just took a bit of time. So this next slide, who can actually apply for an education, health and care needs assessment? Well, actually anybody can. So parents can, carers. It does tend to be, the majority of the time, the settings, so the SENCOs, with parental permission, that actually make the request. But as parents, you can do it as well. But what we would always say, if you're going to do it yourself as parents, the school would be contacted for all of the evidence. We would still need to know about the assessments and what they've put in place under SEN support. There is a form on the local offer. There's an EHC needs assessment request form that can be used. That has just been amended recently with the support from Family Voice to actually make it more user-friendly. And there is a guidance document as well that goes alongside that parents and professionals can use. And it just helps to collate all the relevant information that the local authority would need to consider an EHC needs assessment. The last bullet point on there just repeats again, the request must have signed consent. We can't process a request from a setting, so from a school or a nursery, without signed consent from parents. Okay, so thinking about then, if you've considered an EHC needs assessment and you're starting to collect the evidence, either by yourself or with the school, you would you can see here a list. So the school's assessment is absolutely essential. We need to know what has taken place within the school educational setting, or it could be nursery setting. We need to be looking at, how have they planned to meet the needs of that young person? And we will go on to actually look at an example of what we call the graduated approach in a minute. We need to actually have, evidence of the assessments, the reviews, the impact of provision, and then how that has led on to the next cycle of what we class as the assess, plan, do, review stage, which is part of this graduated approach. And hopefully this next visual will help to actually show that. So if a school talks to you about an APDR or assess, plan, do, review, or use the term graduated approach, this is what they're meaning. So first of all, they'll be looking at the assessment stage. So you can see in the top right-hand corner, they would assess the child. Now this could be just teacher assessments initially. It might be, observations, but they've tried to assess the child's need. They're engaging you as a family to plan what should be put in place. They will then do that and then review it after a set period of time. Once they've reviewed this stage, they may then actually carry out further assessments and planning further provision, putting it in place and reviewing it yet again. This would all be done under SEN support. Now, it may get to the stage where the assessments might be done by external professionals, or they might seek support from wider support specialists that are out there. They could use something called the hubs that we'll go into in a minute. They could use educational psychologists. They might actually use, occupational therapists. There's lots of external support out there, which we will look at in a minute. If they use an external services, they'll be recording all of this in detail to show this next cycle of the assess, plan, do, review. And after they've put in all the external services recommendations, they may start to have that discussion with you about what else needs to happen. So what other professionals they can talk to, or it may get to a stage where they then start to talk to you as a family about an EHC needs assessment. All of this, like I said, would be done under SEN support and evidenced as part of the assess, plan, do, review process. So we spoke about wider support and referral. So what do we mean by that? In some cases, it may be an early help assessment. Again, like we said earlier, it's not needed for an EHC needs assessment to go ahead. But in some cases, an early help assessment might be done, for example, for support from the multi-agency support group, which is often abbreviated as the MAS panel. It might be to get support from a behaviour panel, or it could be to put a referral into a paediatrician for a neurodevelopmental or general developmental assessment. In those cases, an early help assessment is needed to get that level of support from those services. The next bullet point down, so you don't need an early help assessment for this. Schools can actually refer into SENI services. So educational settings can actually request support from specialist teaching services. We've got the advisory teachers for ADHD and autism. We've got specialist teachers of the deaf, blind, physical disabilities. And the schools can complete something called a request for involvement form, abbreviated there to RFI, to access those wider support services. But again, they would always need parental preference. Next bullet point down talks about speech and language referrals or occupational therapy OT referrals. So there are lots of different wider support out there. Any questions so far? Just going to check the chat. You might find actually something that I just didn't go into in the previous slide. The schools might talk about this word called the hubs. Just to make you aware, there are lots of schools in Peterborough that are classed as centres of expertise, where the schools might want to actually talk to them about this assess, plan, do, review cycle to get support and ideas to actually help them with their provision in school. So if the school does talk to you about the hubs, they're talking about these different schools that they are seeking support from. The hubs aren't there to provide any kind of assessment, but they can provide support in good practice. They are the centres of expertise in many different things. So each hub will have a certain category, a certain need that they are specialised in, and the schools can access them. Again, they will do this through talking to yourself and gaining your permission to actually discuss that young person. If there's no further questions, we'll move on again. Just going to see if I can move the slide on. My computer is quite slow today, I'm afraid. Do apologise for the delay. There we are. So next slide. There we go. The EHC needs assessment process. So we're actually going to go over the whole process and talk about what happens at each stage. So Katie was talking earlier about this 0 to 6 week stage. That's the request being submitted to us. That's week 0. So we receive it, we process the paperwork, and one of our statutory assessment and monitoring teams is responsible for the 0 to 6 week stage and will be in contact with you and the educational placement. So they will be looking over the paperwork. They may decide to contact the school to seek further information. Like I think Katie was pointing out earlier, we may find that we're missing a document, or we may find it beneficial to have a timetable of support. So we would be making sure in that 0 to 6 week stage that we've got things like 3 rigorous cycles of the assess plan do review, that it's clear what has happened under SEN support, that it's clear which involved specialists have been involved, and that the school has acted upon their advice. There is guidance on the local authority, and like I said earlier about the hubs there, you can see we are looking for that external support. Now this slide can seem quite confusing to start with, so I'm just going to run from the top. So you can see that again, the 0 to 6 week is at the top. It then moves on to this panel. So it says panel decides. So what happens is all the paperwork that's been collated, the request, goes to a panel to decide whether it's going to move on to the next stage, which will be the needs assessment stage, or whether currently it's a no to an EHC needs assessment at this current time. If it is a no, you'll always receive a letter and a discussion with an officer about, it might be identifying that the support is already available without an EHC plan. So it might be saying to continue the support under SEN support. If you do disagree, there is appeals mediation dispute resolution process, and all information on that process is sent out to you with that letter. If it is a yes, so if the panel of professionals, which is a wide range of professionals from education, health and social care, feel that it should move on to the next stage, it will go through to a needs assessment stage. We class this as weeks 7 to 15. Now, during this time, all professionals are asked for updated reports, so we're asked for additional evidence to submit with the evidence for the next panel. And so the educational placement, health and social care will be contacted for a needs assessment form to be completed. So all of that information is then taken to another panel to look at. It might be at the next panel they feel that with all the additional evidence that they feel that at this point the needs of the child can be met under SEN support, and it would be a no to assess at that current time. But again, you have the right for the appeals mediation dispute resolution process. But if at that point it is a yes, it will then go through to a planning meeting stage where professionals with yourself will draft a plan. So this is the week 16 to 20 stage, which says they're writing the EHC plan. So you're writing a draft of what the plan could look like. Once that is written, that is then sent out to you as a family. So it's not sent out to the educational placements, it's sent out just to you as a family to look through and agree to. If you agree with all what is in the plan, then there is a form to complete that will ask you what educational placement you want your child to go to. It might be to stay at the same mainstream school. It might be to move to another mainstream school. Or if you do request a specialist setting, that would go through to another SEND panel to consider your request. And an officer would then be in contact with you with regards to the panel outcome, whether it is a yes to specialist setting or whether that panel actually feels that the child's needs can be met within mainstream settings. We spoke about this needs assessment advice form. This is just a screenshot of the first page. And like I said earlier, there is guidance on completing the document. But if you have any difficulties actually completing the document, if you are doing it yourself, you can contact the local authority for support and advice, or please do contact your educational placement. Because if you are doing it yourself, the educational placement as part of the process will be requested to submit evidence. So that's why we find a lot are completed by the SENCOs, because it's a joint application. So a lot of people are concerned about, what happens if my child doesn't get an education, health and care plan? Once you get that letter that says it's a no to assess at this current time, some people can be quite worried about that. Now, it does not mean to say that support will stop within your school. Under SEN support, that should continue to meet the young person's needs within that educational setting. They will continue to do the graduated approach, the assess, plan, do, review cycle. That will all continue. You do have the right to appeal, like we said, and all information on that will be sent out with that letter. But you can also then talk to the local authority, the officer, to actually have that discussion. And there might be a way forward meeting within the school with yourself to actually discuss what happens next, about what provision is going to continue to be put in place under SEN support. Any questions so far? So I can see the question there, does the assessment process have to be so busy and it's not easier for parents to understand? As a parent, if you do have any difficulties with understanding anything, there are people that you can talk to. You can talk to the local authority, the casework officer for that case can talk to you about that. Talk to your educational placements, SEND partnership service, there are Family Voice, there are people that you can talk to. I don't know if it's just the screen. I lost the screen for a second. Any questions?
I was just trying to unmute, and every time I try to unmute or look at the chat, it changes my screen. I just wanted to say that that's a good point. That was actually taken from another document a long time ago, and it is very busy. In the new guidance document that we've recently put together, at the very end, there's what I consider to be a little bit more visually friendly process. So that it's right at the very end, but I can try and find that and share it just to see if you think that that's better to look at.
Thank you, Katie. We'll move on then, because there will be time for questions at the end. Just going to see if my computer can catch up. There we go. Okay, so this part we're going to move on to what happens if your child is issued an education, health and care plan. So like I said earlier, you will receive the draft, you will receive that form to complete. If you are considering what schools are out there, all the list of schools and details can be found on the local offer. We would always say talk to those schools, understand the school's dynamics, size, talk to the SENCO. In the past, we would always sort of advise to go and have a look round. We know with COVID at the moment, not all schools are offering that. They have to be careful with their risk assessments, but do talk to the SENCOs. Do understand what that school is like, and there will be an SEND information report on the school's website to look at as well. Now, if you have decided on a change of placement, please understand that we do then have to send out what we class as a consultation to that individual school, and it will be to the local catchment school as well. That school or those schools then have 15 days to respond to that consultation about whether they feel they can meet need, or if they would like to discuss that further with the local authority. Okay, that is a statutory process. So there are 15 days that we have to consult, and the schools will have that 15 days to respond to us. Like I said earlier, if you do request a specialist provision, you know, it is discussed at an SEN panel, and you will then be informed of that decision by your casework officer and have that discussion. But once all of that is decided, once you've named a school or we've consulted, at that point you will then get the final plan with the name of that educational placement, and any additional funding, where applicable, will be written into the plan. And all of that information is found at the back. We would always say that a child has right to mainstream education, you know, just thinking about the code of practice, and you can see their reference to the Children and Families Act. You know, we have to actually consult, but a parent has the right to mainstream education. If a school is saying that they feel they may have difficulties meeting need, then they will have that discussion with the local authority. But you have to be considerate of things like the school and other institution requested is the school may say is unsuitable to the age, ability, aptitude or special educational needs of the child or young person concerned, or they may talk about the attendance of the child and young person at the requested school or other institution will be incompatible with maybe the provision of efficient education for others or efficient use of resources. If they do, then as a local authority, we will have those discussions with that school to look at, you know, reasonable steps that can be made to provide education, because you do have a right to mainstream. So what is an education, health and care plan? You can see there a screenshot of the new template that we have, which has just been released this term. Every plan, regardless of what local authority you are currently living in, it consists of different sections. And so you may hear people talking about, you know, section A, all about me, what I want for the future. So section A really encompasses, you know, the parents and the child's views. Section B will be a summary of strengths and special educational needs. C is all about health needs. So we'll be looking at, you know, health advice for that section. And the same with section D, you'll be looking at social care advice if there are any social care needs. Section E and F. So section E is the outcomes that are jointly discussed and put into a plan. Section F is the provision that's needed for each one of those outcomes to help that child meet that outcome. Section G, H1 and H2 are any outcomes that talk about health or social care provision. So there'll be an outcome and provision listed within those sections if that has been identified by those professionals. Section I is where the educational placement is put, and section J are things like the budget, so the personal budgets, and section K is appendices. So that's a list of all the advice that's been received since the start of the plan and since the request stage. So that's external reports, that could be annual review reports listed in that section. Now, just to make you aware as well, the outcomes are long-term outcomes. So they will always be to the end of a key stage. So we talk about end of key stage 1 being the end of year 2 in primary school. The end of key stage 2, we are talking about the end of year 6 in primary school. End of key stage 3 is end of year 9 in secondary school. End of key stage 4 is then the year 11 in secondary school. And then we talk about post-16. Now, it's important to point out that if in the plan there are those long-term outcomes, the school will always have those smaller stepping stones to help meet that outcome. So they will be setting, you know, smaller outcomes, so smaller targets they may class them as, to help meet that longer term outcome. You may hear people talking about a golden thread. Now, the idea of this golden thread is, you know, something that links the young person's aspirations, so that what they want to do, what they want to achieve, to needs, outcomes, and the support they are receiving. So you should clearly be able to see in a plan that there are outcomes that are linked to what the child wants to achieve. It may be something to do with an aspiration about a job, maybe an aspiration about living independently. But you would always then see that the provision is linked to that outcome, that it's really focused on understanding that child's needs so that they can meet that outcome. And all the way, we always talk about this aspiration. It's really important to think about what that child or young person and as a family are the longer term aspirations. So how are they reviewed? So once your child gets a plan, now this might link clearly back to, I think, what somebody was saying earlier about that their child has a plan, but it hasn't been reviewed in 2 years. I would like to really point out that the statutory process is that the plans are reviewed annually. So annually means within 12 months of the last annual review or a new plan being issued. So a review has to happen within 12 months. And at that review, they're really looking at, you know, the outcomes. So have they met the outcomes? And if they have, is there a new outcome needed? Are there any changes to need? You know, thinking about the needs of the young person. Thinking about then the provision that links that need and outcome. So is there any changes to provision? And all of that, all of the amendments will be put onto the plan and sent into the local authority with a record of that annual review meeting, which we call a Section L. It's just a form that we give out to educational placements to fill in at those annual reviews. And it's like just a record of minutes of the meeting. So the educational placements will send in a Section L as well as an annotated plan to the local authority. And we will then consider whether we make amendments or whether there's no amendments needed at that current time. It might be, if there's only minor changes to the plan, that we actually decide there's no amendment needed, because the Section L will become part of that plan and will be a record of what was discussed. It's very important, though, at transition points that amendments are made to those outcomes, because all the outcomes will then be set to the next end of key stage. Just before we moved on to the SEND partnership, do we have any questions about the education, health and care plans? Can't currently see the chat. I don't know if there's any questions in the chat.
Yeah, I do, Bev.
Hello, Bev.
Yeah, I've had such a disaster with this EHC plan right from the beginning, and I'll discuss it with them later.
Okay, that's fine. That can be discussed out of the meeting if you wish. Are there any sort of key points, though, from those difficulties that you've had that you just want to raise a general point?
Yeah, it's well, it's all seems to have like all changed since the first lot of EHC plan was like done, because there's a lot of new things that have been put into place.
Okay, so if there are sort of new provisions put in place to meet the needs of that young person, it's normally at the annual review process that will be captured and put onto the plan.
I meant to go through all of it. I mean, you've added something extra at the beginning before you get the plan, and then that AP, whatever it is, that wasn't there when. Yeah, that wasn't there when my daughter was going through the plan. She was changing from statement to the plan, and the statement seemed a lot easier and a lot straightforward, whereas the EHC plan, I tell you, I've had a nightmare with it.
Oh, well, we are really sorry to hear that you've had that sort of difficulty. There was lots of changes with a new code of practice and the way things were done. So there was a massive overhaul really from the statement stage to the new education, health and care plan stage. You know, it is very, very different. What we do find is that the education, health and care plans are really sort of pupil focused. They really consider that golden thread about that aspirations, making sure everything is linked. And actually the new format should be clear. So if there are difficulties within your child's format, then that needs to be addressed at an annual review meeting within that educational setting. Katie, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think I'm getting what you're saying, Bev. It does feel very different, especially when you were used to statements. It's not meant to be a more difficult process for you. It's meant to be easier. So I'm sorry that that's not your experience. What I would say is as well that you'll be aware there's been a SEND review, and that we are awaiting the outcome of that. And it's been pushed back even further now, I believe, until sort of late spring. But that has looked at all of this and looked at the impact that it's had, and how the things that are going well, the things that are not going well, and there will be some improvements and alterations as a result of that review. I think in terms of your particular case, we'll get together at the end, and if that suits you, and have a discussion, because I just need to understand a little bit more about your individual circumstance and how we can make that better for you.
Oh yes, please. I mean, from year 10, I've had problems.
Okay.
He is now 20.
Right.
So you can see that I've had problems all the way through her EHC, and I feel as though she's been let down by everybody in the education sector.
Okay, so that's a good 5 years of a really raw experience for you. So let's have a look at that and see. You know, I can't go back and change anything that's taken place, but let's see where we are now, and particularly around you saying that there hasn't been a review. So let's look into that and see if we can move things forward for you and get a better plan that you feel is more effective.
Brilliant, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I'm just going to see if I can show you the last couple of slides. Just going to see if my computer can catch up again. I think it's currently paused. Let's see if it will catch up. Okay, so we've got a couple of slides just about the SEND Partnership Service. This is totally an independent service. Katie, do we have anybody from the SEND Partnership Service with us today?
No.
Okay, so we'll just keep these slides in just so you're aware of what the SEND Partnership Service does. So they provide that impartial advice. They can advise and support, you know, you as a family and a young person through this complex special educational needs process that you've identified. You know, sometimes is complex, but there are people that you can talk to. So you can talk to the local authority, your casework officer, or you can contact this independent service to support you with that. They can give you advice and support with regards to your rights to ensure the educational needs of your children are being met and your young people. They can talk about, you know, the young person and their rights to ensure, you know, that it's being met in all, you know, educational settings, whether that's nursery or post-16 provision or beyond. They give that support for parents, you know, around, you know, the health services, the social care professional service with regards to the education, health and care plan, or under SEN support. So your child doesn't need an education, health and care plan. If your child has special needs, this service may be able to support you with the processes and understanding educational placements. They can support as well in resolving any disagreements. There is a slide here about their contact numbers, so they do have an email address. There is a contact number there. You can leave a message and they can get back to you, or you can just email them. We do include here something called the local offer. Now, hopefully people are all aware that the local authority has a local offer on our City Council website. So this can be a source of information. So there's lots on the local offer about the education, health and care plan process, about, you know, how to request an EHC needs assessment. So that would include the form. There's lots of documents relating to the statutory process on the local offer. A continuous work in progress. So, you know, we do want your feedback. You know, if you do find it difficult to find certain documents, or when you're looking you can't find something, you know, please do feed that back to the local authority. We are looking at amending and supporting our local offer currently, so we are always looking at improvements, and the local offer is actually co-produced with Family Voice. So it is done with, you know, parent and carer forums that take place quite regularly. And like I say, that we are currently actually looking at the local offer and how to improve.
And we've got Roger with us today. Is there anything you'd like to add, Roger? Roger, are you there? Not sure whether he's heard or
Okay.
on mute.
That's fine.
Sorry, I was my mic was on mute and not just on the screen. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, sorry, I just waffled then for about. Just basically on every page, there's a little button on the right-hand side called feedback. And if people do want to feedback, that's designed to make it very quick and easy. So all you have to do is click on that button and a pop-up comes up, and you can then just feed in one of the little boxes what you were looking for and what you can't find. And it's totally anonymous, so that's fine in that respect. And we also know on the back office what page you were on, so it will help us understand that when you were on a certain page, you were looking something and it either is or isn't there. And we're very active on that. We have that go into a group mailbox, and it's dealt with regularly and with a lot of importance. So the feedback is really important to us, and we can guarantee whatever you put in, we will deal with straight away.
Thank you, Roger. That's really helpful. Okay, I still haven't got the chat up. Still haven't worked out how to do that when I'm trying to share screen as well. So apologies for that. I'm not used to Zoom. I'm used to Teams. So it's been a bit of a learning curve for me today. Apologies if you've experienced any rubbish reception from us, so I'm sorry about that. Okay, so any questions at all? I can't see the chat, but if anyone wants to ask anything, please do go ahead. Okay.
Sorry, hi, can I just ask something? I know that the EHCPs last up until the young person is 25 years of age.
They can do. They don't,
okay.
They don't have to.
Okay, so when they do, and there's other agencies involved, as in, I don't know, mental health services or CAMS or things, is it really challenging to get them to contribute or get them involved? Is that, because I think, is that the reason why often sort of we hear a lot of parents that say that actually it's the HCP's there, but it's just a piece of paper. It doesn't actually, we don't actually have reviews, or we don't have other people involved.
I think you make a really good point there, Naz, and that's so when we're doing the assessment, it's the local authority that gets the advice from involved practitioners and professionals. When it's the time of the annual review, it's the educational settings responsibility to seek the updated advice to feed into the annual review. And so if they're not contacting a social worker or a mental health practitioner or any other involved professionals such as occupational therapists, etc., to get updated advice and send it in to us, we don't know, because we don't know what we don't know. So we can only update a plan given the information that the school or nursery or college has sent to us. What we are doing is we're trying to, where we can see there was previous involvement and nothing's been updated, we are going back to those settings and saying, look, we know there was previously SALT involvement here, there's nothing, for example. What we're also doing is we're rolling out some statutory training to other agencies and schools on which really targets the annual review process, so that we're trying to upskill educational settings in making sure that they get as much information and advice as possible to inform a review, and that it's not just a paper exercise, it's a proper update. So I don't know if that helps at all. Michelle, have you got anything you'd like to add? And I know, Jason, you've got your hand up as well.
I think, yeah, I'm just going back to Nazreen's question. I'm a family voice parent rep, and I think Nazreen as well. The issue seems to be that once the child or adult leaves education, there's the issue. After that, up till then, most people know who's doing what when. After they leave, it's the adult bit, obviously the 18 plus bit, or even the 16 plus bit that seems to be the issue.
Right. So
is there any scope for these? Because to me it just sounds like, because there's so many people involved and there's each individual, there's nuances, isn't there? There might be an OT, there might be SALT, there might be CAMS. I think that the idea of training other stakeholders is amazing, but I think maybe getting CAMS involved, and it's a massive piece of work, isn't it? Because no one child will have just sort of straightforward, here's the school and that's it. There'll be physios, there'll be OTs. It's a massive task, isn't it? And I guess the bottom line is, if there's no funding there to fund somebody who's able to coordinate all of that, that's going to be a challenge.
So it's really important that, as you say, that educational settings are aware of their responsibility in terms of seeking that updated advice from the involved professionals. And they are the sort of the central people who know who is involved. They generally know who the social worker is. They know who the SALT is. And then what we're doing is we're training those agencies as well. And we're training health staff and social care staff to say, look, when you get a request from a school to inform an education, health and care plan annual review, it's really important that you do it. Because an example is, if speech and language therapy is written into a plan, but actually the episode of care has closed, nobody's got updated advice from speech and language therapy services, and therefore the review comes into the local authority, we can see, oh, there's been no changes made to the speech and language therapy, and leave the speech and language therapy in the plan, not knowing that the episode of care is now closed. It's in there. So therefore, there's a duty to deliver it. So this is what we're trying to say, that it's the importance is so important, and we're getting that message out. And I think we are seeing an improvement in our annual reviews as a result of that, and the quality of them. I think another thing, Jason, touching on what you've said, Jason, is that preparing young adults for leaving education. So we have our transition officers that go along to they either go to the year 10 or 11 annual reviews. But what we're also doing is we are, because as you know, that we would be looking, if we've got an older young person that's no longer wishing to be in education, or it's no longer appropriate for them, we would be looking to cease to maintain their plan. And what we're doing is we're doing undertaking some guidance around cease to maintain, and we are involving our health and social care colleagues in that, and Family Voice, Imani's part of that, and it was Asta as well until she's just recently left us. But that's a piece of work that we are embarking on, so that we can make sure that there is a clear pathway, if you like, into adulthood once education is no longer part of that young person's life. Because I think you're right, Jason, it just, you know, everyone talks about that cliff edge, and it's always just moving, isn't it? And it's about getting the support right. So if, you know, I mean, particularly if you feel that would be useful to be part of that group, speak to Louise about that.
It just seems to me, and I know this because my son's 20 and he has one, but he had one, but he doesn't use it. Or we don't have one now. But what I'm saying is, once you get into 16, certain services won't have you. Yeah, absolutely. You drop off.
Yeah.
You're either too young or too old. So where do you go? So there's that issue.
Yeah.
You then got the issue of, well, if they've been away at school, that my lad did, how do we get him back? And what provision will there be that there was at school but locally? And all of that. There's a lot of, and I think it's you as a local authority rely on the parents to do all that finding when a child turns 16. Well,
and that should really be discussed in the annual review moving forward, shouldn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Because,
can I add on to that as well? You know, when you say CAMS, well, when a child turns 16, they're taken off the paediatrician who they normally see on their 16th birthday, and then you have up to the waiting list to get any appointment with CAMS is up to 2 years. So what happens then when you don't have any information for those 2 years? It's lucky that I managed to get an emergency appointment because I was having problems, and they managed to split me in. But I've known parents to literally wait 2 years before they can even get one appointment to see somebody from CAMS.
Yeah, and I think
the adult part.
Yeah. Yeah, and the threshold is different as well, isn't it, when you're going into those adult services? I think that's difficult for me to comment on because obviously I don't work for health, and that's quite something that would need to be responded to by a health colleague.
No, but no disrespect, but you are involved in the EHCPs, and these have been going on years, and we're still having the issues.
Yeah, and I mean that's a fair point, Jason. But from our team's perspective, what we do is we run the statutory process. We're not responsible for when clinicians see people and the length of waiting lists. We don't have any, as much as we'd like to, we don't have any sort of power over that. What I would say is that, you know, health are fully aware of their duty to cooperate. But I'm just saying I can't answer in terms of their waiting lists.
I know you can't understand, but what I'm saying is that you saying that you ask for the health, like the doctor's input and that, but if you write or go back to the paediatrician that they've been with, and they will write to letters saying, well, they're not with us anymore, you need to go to the adult part because they're on the adult side now.
And you're saying
you can't get the information you need for that adult because they've not been seen. So for 2 years, the health part of the EHC plan is lapsed.
Yeah.
Is lapsed. There's no plan at all.
Yeah, I totally understand that, and I don't have an answer as to how that.
But that needs bringing in to the health people who are doing the health side of the EHC plan. I know it's not the local authority, but that needs to be added into the review, that children are being left in limbo from the age of 16 until they get appointment, when they should be getting an appointment.
There is a
Can I just offer a suggestion? So I used to work with the adult mental health team in the community, and we actually had no training in EHCPs at all whatsoever. So it wasn't our domain. It was what college did. It was what the school did, or the day centre. It wasn't our domain. So I think if this training, or if some sort of campaign for awareness is going to happen, it needs to include CAMS. It needs to include the adult locality teams, so that when a young person is being transferred from CAMS to adult locality team, which is a massive change because they work completely differently to CAMS, and legally the parents' role changes and lots of things change. So I guess out of this workshop, or out of this training, if there's anything to take away from it, is that the process is clearly there. The ACP process is clearly there. There are people who know what they're doing in the local authority. It's just, how do we get that across to other stakeholders who are really important in the whole process of meeting that young person's needs? Is how do we get all of them singing from the same hymn sheet and knowing what they're doing?
And I think
this is why the EHC plan was done, to make sure that everybody was involved. It's okay for when they're younger, but as soon as they hit 16, everything stops. You can't get any further from so the health side on the EHC plan stops. The educational side carries on, but the health part stops, because you can't get no answers. And us as parents sit on the end of the phone, pulling our hairs out, crying, screaming at the walls to get some further answers, because you can't change, or this needs change, that needs change, but you can't do that without the doctors say so.
Yeah. Now, there is a health send sort of partnership group, which I get to go to sometimes, and I'll definitely feed that back into them. They sit, I can't remember how often they sit. Somebody from Family Voice also goes to that, but we can certainly feed that back to the DCO. Michelle, I know that we have a lot of, as part of our statutory training, we have a lot of training that's been delivered to health colleagues, to paediatricians, to therapists, etc. Has there been anything to sort of adult services?
Yeah, so just to make sort of everybody aware, last academic year, we had 3 training sessions offered to health. We had sessions offered to social care professionals as well as educational professionals. So we are starting to provide that training. It is carrying on this year. So those professionals that couldn't attend last year on those dates have the opportunity this year to attend. With regards to sort of adult social care, it is offered to all social care professionals, but that's something we can talk to the health services about, just to make sure that, you know, adult social care are also involved, because as we know, the Education, Health and Care Plan, you know, stays in place beyond 16. You know, that was one of the major changes from the old statements to Education, Health and Care Plans. So we're going to certainly take that back to health colleagues to make sure that they are accessing the local authority training with regards to Education, Health and Care Plans.
Yeah, we'll take that away as an action. Thank you for the feedback. Anything else from anyone?
If there's no other questions, I am just going to put an evaluation form within the chat so people can access that.
And I'm mindful that I think a lot of those of you that are attending today have children, young people with EHC, so I'm not sure how useful this session has been for you, because obviously this has been about the assessment process, but you may be more interested in the review process, which is coming up in January time. Naz, I have spoken to Louise while we've sort of been on this, and she said that she was hoping for about another 10 people to attend the session. So I have offered, if those 10 for whatever reason would like, couldn't come today, would like to rebook, and they think this is something that would be useful for them, more than happy to arrange another date. Okay.